On behalf of the school committee, I would like to welcome you and congratulate you on being selected as a finalist for the superintendent in the Dudley-Charlton Regional School District. Before we begin, I'd like to go over our format for this evening. For the next hour, committee members will be asking you a series of questions, with every member asking at least one question. We ask that you keep your responses brief, except where a question has multiple parts, as we hope to ask somewhere between 12 and 15 questions within the appointed time frame. If time permits, at the end of our questions, you will be able to provide some closing remarks. Members, before asking your questions, please introduce yourself, and we'll start from going around the table, and we'll start on our left, our right, I'm sorry. I've been doing the right, I'm going to stick with it.
Good evening, Dr. Carlson, Elaine Rabbit, school committee member from Charlton. We met on several occasions. So I have a lengthy question.
Okay.
It's multi-part, so if you need me to repeat it, I'm more than happy to do so. The educator evaluation process has been in place for several years now. Can you speak to how you utilize the system to develop your educators and administrative team to improve their craft? Can you provide examples of using the process to help a staff member grow their skill set, using the process to address an underperforming staff member, and using the process so that the functions within the process, such as observation, are seen as a positive? Finally, how have you set your own yearly goals to address both the needs of your supervisors and your desire for personal and professional growth? And what type of support and feedback do you find beneficial?
Yes, that is a long question. So first, good evening, everybody, and thank you very much for having me. I have to say evaluation, I look at it from different viewpoints. Probably the first and primary was as an educator, as a teacher in a classroom, and how very little I ever saw an administrator come in to observe me as a teacher. I can tell you as a teacher, I was really hungry for feedback. What was I doing well? What did I need to improve in? And that was just non-existent. So I really kind of made it a point when I became an administrator to learn as much as possible about the educator evaluation system. In Hawaii, as well as in Providence and Rhode Island, we use the Charlotte-Danielson method, which is very similar to how we run it here in Massachusetts. Basically, it's a collection of evidence. It provides an opportunity in order to give appropriate feedback, but also it's more of a collaboration. And that's really how I like to look at it. I am in Fall River now. We have 16 schools, and out of those 16 schools, I evaluate between 12 and 10 of our principals. In addition to that, I also have 7 people on the Office of Instruction team in which I evaluate. The first step that I like to focus on is walking through the process with each of the principals, whether they're a veteran principal or they're brand new to the position, just to sit down, talk about what they would like to get out of the process, as well as where I feel that I can provide support and services. From there, and I believe I sent it over in the packet, I do informal observations, and based off that informal, I do a post-conference. I first do a letter to the principal or to the Office of Instruction employee, and it just goes over basically what I like to call the wows and wonders. This is what I saw that was really good, and these are the areas that I either have questions or I think that might be an area of focus. The reason why I call it wows and wonders is because it's my first look within the system. It's usually that they're not expecting me, so it's not supposed to be a getcha. It's not supposed to be a checklist of different indicators in which you either are successful or you're not. After I send the letter, we schedule a post-conference, which is not necessarily required as part of the mass evaluation system, but that's where I like to sit down and start talking about goals. So what are those areas? Do you see the same things that I'm seeing? And that's where we start to develop the areas that we want to either focus in on, or areas that I might be able to provide assistance, or areas that they feel like they're very strong in, but they may want me to have a special focused eye in that area. From there, we set up the whole year process. I tend to do 2 informals as well as a formal observation, which is mutually agreed upon. From there, we give feedback at each of those different rounds, and then we close with a middle of the year and then an end of the year conference. I think that this cycle has been very successful. I have worked with all of our new administrators in Fall River, and I also coached some of our new administrators in Providence as well. When I was a teacher, as I said before, I was a building union rep, so I also worked with teachers on what they should expect through their evaluations. And so the only way I've operated on is what I really wished I had more of. And so that's how I really try to focus my attention with all of my administrators that I work with right now. I think it's a system that should be honored. It's only as good as we use it. It can be used very easily as a getcha, but I don't think it should be done that way. I think it's supposed to be a collaboration. I am supposed to be the person that's the champion, and I feel like that's one of the reasons why I've really enjoyed working out of central office, is because that's what I get to do. I get to champion for my administrators and become the loud voice to ensure that they can do their jobs so our students are successful within the schools. For me personally, I kind of go through that same system. When I start to self-reflect on where I would like to grow, I look at those areas that I feel very confident in, I feel very comfortable, and then I start to look at those areas that I'd like to learn a little bit more about. And then that's how I create my annual goals, whether it's a personal goal, a professional goal, or my student learning goals. I really like to look at where do I want to grow, what are those things that I can really invest my time and effort in so that I can move myself to that next level. One of the great things is I started off as a student with a disability when I was in school. I was late to learn to read. Where I grew up, that was very hush-hush, you didn't talk about it. And I was very ashamed for most of my young life. And then I went off to the University of Texas because I could throw things really far, so they gave me a scholarship. And then I remember thinking back then, I will never go back into a school system ever again. It was embarrassing, things that teachers said to me. And so I felt like those experiences, when I decided to go back, after my sister invited me into her classroom one day to be a guest speaker, I went to the class and I saw how she interacted with students, and I so really wanted to do that. But my sister and I have had lots of conversations about how we can grow ourselves. I think one is learn from our own experience, but living with an English teacher, he often reminds me every single day, did you get the voice of your teachers? Did you get the voice of your administrators before you're making decisions? And I think that that's really important in evaluation. Always making sure that you're not focused on what you want, but what does the person being evaluated really need out of that whole cycle? And I don't know, Ms. Rabbit, you might want to let me know if I missed any pieces of that question.
I would come back to the last part of what type of support and feedback do you find beneficial to yourself as we would be your evaluators?
I think one of the things that I'm really pride myself on is I do what I say. I think that very open and transparent relationship. I really thrive off of communication. I shared with you folks that I send a weekly Friday finale to all of my administrators that just goes over all the important things. But I also, to my superintendent, which is not required, and people have questioned why I do this, I send my week to my superintendent each week that just goes over really key things that I feel that he needs to know, but also kind of a breakdown of what my week looks like. I would like to carry that process over with the school committee, because now we want to be on the same team. We want to be making sure that we are focused on the same goals, but also if you see things that you have questions, we can have that immediate dialogue and follow through. So I feel like really a close relationship. That's what I'm hopeful for, but also it's a two-way communication. So if there's areas that you see that need to be improved upon, that you feel that you can immediately reach out to me, and vice versa.
Thank you.
Hi, how are you?
Very well.
I'm Stephanie Reed. As a leader of this district, how would you obtain the buy-in of staff and administration for change or new ideas to bring us from good to great?
I love the book. I often use Good to Great because my dad was one of the first pilots for Southwest Airlines, which is one of the featured companies. They're not looking so great in the media right now, but he doesn't work for them anymore. He's retired. I think buy-in is all about relationships. I think that, and that's what a lot of Good to Great talks about, that people, if they don't really like you and they don't believe you, they're not necessarily going to jump on board. They're not going to really want to follow you. So I think really it's how it has to start with building relationships. And it's not just building relationships top down. I've always been a big believer that when they see you, perception is reality. If they never see me in the buildings, they never see me in the classrooms, the students never see me down on the floor with them, then how can they really get on board with any ideas or changes that I wish to impose or to implement across the system? So really, I think in order to go from good to great, because Dudley-Charlton is doing good. I've looked at all of your scores, especially when you have one student who didn't pass the MCAS. That's really good. But is it great? I've heard a lot from my time here that we want a new high school. We want to be the shining example out here in this region of what a beautiful school district can look like. So in order to get that buy-in, people have to know who I am, what I stand for, but really that has to be on site. I have to be in all the schools. I have to be with all the students, working with the administrative team, and you folks as well. I think one example that I'd really like to highlight for that is when I was at Central High School. I talked about this in my first interview. I moved into Providence, and people literally said to me, "Oh my gosh, aren't you scared to go to work there?" And I remember thinking I was there for a week, and I didn't know what anyone was talking about. The kids were beautiful, the teachers were great, the environment was fabulous. But Central High School has had this reputation for more than 20 years that it was a very dangerous school. So one of the things that I instituted was the school community walkthrough, in which we invited businesses and community partners and parents, and each month we had a theme, and we would either talk about English language learners, we talk about our gifted and talented, we would talk about a whole host of topics, and then we'd actually walk people through the buildings, because perception, again, is reality. And we started to get so much buy-in because people started to realize that Central High School was not a dumpy school that was not worth the time and energy of the business community at large and our partners. We became one of the first high schools in all of Rhode Island to receive the 21st Century Grant in order to bring more partnerships within the school, which inevitably gave more opportunities for our students. We were the first school to do the College Bridge program with CCRI, and that program enabled our juniors and seniors to take college-level courses while they were still in high school and effectively graduate with a year underneath their belt. And these were all first-generation students who had never realized college was even an option. So I really think that in order to go from that good, we're a good system, to great, you have to have those relationships, you have to have that buy-in, but you also have to set the stage, and you have to show people at large, the community at large, that this is where we are, but set that vision to where we want to go so they can be on board and they can participate in that journey to where we want to go.
Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Carlson, it's nice to see you again. My name is Kathy Carmignani, and I'm from Dudley. Could you please talk to us about how you use data and provide us with examples of how you've used data to help make decisions, plan, budget, or work with others?
I use data all the time. I always like to caution people that data can really tell you whatever you want it to, if not used appropriately. I am a huge believer in something called professional learning cycles, or PLCs for short. And basically what PLCs is a cycle of figuring out what you want the kids to know, how do you know if they know it, and what do you do if they're not getting it. And data is integral at every single piece. I have to say, as a trained special educator, data was a everyday occurrence with our students, finding out what was the goal that they needed to reach, and then assessing them to find out how they were performing on that goal, and then making corrections in our teaching in order to support that child to get to their end goal. As an administrator, it was really no different, but it was looking more at a bigger picture. When I was at Central, we had a budget of close to $600,000, and really what I wanted to do, and this kind of goes to what we're talking about with budgeting, was look at my student population. And what we knew is that each child came with a certain dollar amount. And that amount may sound like, what? But what we looked at was we had a huge increase of our ELL population, but when I first started, I noticed that a very small portion of the budget was allocated specifically for our ELL population. In roughly 6 months, we went from 19% all the way up to 39% ELL, and that was a huge shift. So with my team, before we started to allocate funds for year 2, what we did is we looked at all the students and the different categories that they fell into. And we looked at what was the state allocation for each of those students. So you had your general education, non-Latino students, that they would receive, let's say, $100. If they had special ed services, they received another $75. If they were ELL, they received $50. And we started to create buckets of, and look at what we were doing, or a root cause analysis, and really start to see, did we have supports and services across the board in order to support all of our different individualized learners. And what we found was that we had great tier 1 instruction, but we were not really looking at our tier 2 and our tier 3. And therefore, we were not appropriately allocating our funds for the students that needed it the most. We made a huge shift, and I think I shared some information, but Central High School went from being the worst high school in Rhode Island, and it's not even identified any longer. My children are still in schools, and my son's middle school that used to be thought to be the best is now one of the worst middle schools. So it's very important that when you're looking at data, that you're making sure that you're making appropriate decisions. And so 2 different ways, just because I get excited and I talk a lot. That PLC cycle, following a cycle of making sure we're looking at the right things and then going back to it and making changes, that has always been very successful in each of the roles that I have played. And then the second, when we're really talking about budget and the use of data, you have to know your students, and you have to know the changes to not only your community, but to your schools, and then ensure that you're allocating funds the appropriate way. I have never been a superintendent, so I'm not going to look at you and say that I have the expert budgeting experience, but what I do have is a determination to make sure that if I am not the smartest one in the room, I surround myself with the smartest people in the room so that we can make appropriate decisions. But I have been successful in each of the roles that I have been honored to serve in, because I make sure that I learn as much as I need to, and then continue on and move forward. I knew I did not have to go get a doctorate degree, but that goes back to the first question. When I was in middle school and I was in classes where they told me that you'll never go to college because you have a learning disability, I'm not the type of person that stops there. I was not stupid. I just have a different way of learning. And I have found that's been very successful because I don't just do things on my own. I bring people with me. Yes.
Hi, Pauline O'Coin. How important to you are community ideas and parent community input into district decision-making? How will you facilitate the flow of information from the district parents and community? How will you facilitate the flow of ideas and critical feedback from parents and other citizens back to the district?
That's an excellent question. I'm actually serving on a parent advisory board right now. I was talking about my son's middle school, which has just recently gone into status of being one of the lowest performing schools in the state. And Providence, though they do a lot of beautiful things, didn't ask a lot of questions from the parents. I am a parent of 2 boys in school, and I think it's so important that we include our parents and our community in the decisions that we're making. A lot of times it's just about acknowledging that there are things that need to happen and letting people have a voice in each of those systems. I have always been a big fan of our different, for example, we have the PACs, the Parent Advisory Committees. I think that we should really establish ones for different key initiatives that the school's involved in. Just like you set up a superintendent search committee, I understand that Shepherd Hill's looking to possibly build a new high school. I think that we need to have different voices on what does that school need to entail. Do we want it to be a high-tech school? Do we want it to be a personalized school? Do we want it to be a blended learning school? So I really think that we need to have parents involved in each of those different aspects. Back to the question, Ms. Reed, that we were talking about earlier, I've always been very big on setting up things called school community walkthroughs, and that's really to get people to understand what we are trying to accomplish. I could imagine at this level, it would be really deliberate in what we'd want to do and what are those key areas. One of the things that we are working on right now is we have joint labor management committees. I head the instructional one, and all of our focus is with teachers and parents and community members is about what does our instruction look like and how we're assessing. I would really enjoy working on these as well as a part of this role. But really first starting on what would be those big key items that we want to accomplish, and then how do we get people to come to these different work groups, or just if we're just going to communicate openly about these different topics, but to also solicit feedback from all of our parents and our community members as well.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Mary Antossi from Charlton. Our district is a multi-million-dollar operation. Some would say it should be run like a business. How would you respond to that?
Well, having worked in the business field for quite some time, I would say yes and no. To be honest, the kids are the easy part a lot of the times in school systems. They're the ones that come up to you. I think the last time I was here, one came up to me and hugged me and told me I was pretty. I mean, that makes your day. Business is a whole nother ball game. Budgeting, I mean, there you can want to do a bazillion different things, but you may not have a budget that can actually afford you to do that. I think that comes back to communication and not being able to really understand that. But yes, you have to be able to manage money. You have to be able to look at data and know where that money needs to go and why it needs to go there. And then you need to be able to communicate that effectively to your community at large. So in the effects, or in that world, yes, it needs to be very strategic and business-like. But businesses don't then go into a school system and look at teaching and learning. Students, I don't think, are a commodity. They're not a product. They're not expendable. They're ever-changing and growing that has to be learned and understood and loved. And I don't think that is business-like at all, at least not any business field that I've ever worked in. So I think that there is the facilities and the understanding of the budget and understanding of allocations and all of those things that do need to be business-like. But then at the schools, you have to recognize that there's so many different things that happen. For example, I don't think that businesses really have to call snow days, and then they don't really have to look down the road at how that affects our students that are special needs, and are they being afforded the number of minutes that they need within a certain week, or our ELL students. I think there's so many different facets of a school system that there's some things that do need to be very structured like a business, but then you have to be open and flexible for the fact that it's a school community.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Catherine Caballo from Dudley. Control is an important element in managing a school district. How do you manage to be in control without being overly controlling?
Well, that's a good question. I can say from experience. I can say when I first became a vice principal, it was exciting to be in control. And I remember if a student probably looked at me the wrong way, they were suspended. And because we had a very supportive principal at the time that loved suspension, I thought the things that I was doing were appropriate. In reflection and looking back, I was setting up a pipeline for failure, and that suspension is not always the first line of defense. But I felt like I was in control. What I have found is I feel much more comfortable when I am collaborative. I feel much more in control when I have multiple voices before a decision is made. Ultimately, decisions need to be made, but I again feel that when we're collaborating collectively, that the right decisions can be made. It's a tough situation. I don't think that you'll ever please everybody. I think that there will always be people that don't agree with decisions that are made. But again, that comes back to communication and relationship building. And if people understand why before the what, I think that they're much more comfortable with it. I'm still learning. I don't think I'll ever stop growing and learning. But I find that one of my best qualities is being open to feedback and open to criticism. Sometimes it's tough, but when you can swallow your pride and you can remember what you're doing this for, I think it makes reflection much easier, even if it's not what you want to reflect on.
Thank you.
Hi, Jamie Terry. I'm one of the Charlton members. Let me start by saying I think our district has many great attributes, but we are always striving to be better, as we've talked a little bit about tonight. After sifting through a full day of learning about our district when you came and did your site visit, and getting to know many on the interview committee and throughout the process, and some of the students and staff when you were able to come in, what steps would be your first steps to taking on bettering our district if you're appointed?
I don't think a couple visits to the district do I know the district well enough to really even make a judgment on how I would better it. I think that I would need to be much more, I need to dive in head first. I need to get to know people much better. I need to get to know each of you and what is your driving forces and why you're serving as a school committee member. What do you want? I can only believe it's because you want what's best for the students and for this community. So I would really have to first go slow to move fast. I'd have to get to know each of the key members of the school committee, but also each of the schools. I can tell you the schools that I visited when I was here, I know a lot more because I had the time to meet with the principals. At one of the schools, I got to meet with the vice principal because Chris, and I can never say his last name, was out on a visit. No. Sorry. But I got to walk around with his vice principal and see how he interacted with students and what the things the students were saying to him, which really cued me in on what was the driving force. Without even asking him, I knew that they really were looking at social emotional learning within that school community. One of the girls was telling me she was at Charlton Middle School and had just moved to Dudley Middle School, and just what she was talking about was that shift and that side and then our school. So there were certain things that I just by listening, I started to pick up, and that's probably where I would want to start here. I would want to do a tour. I'd want to listen and seek to understand. I talk about that in my suggested entry plan, which, to be honest, I started to put my ideas down before even coming here, and that would be scrapped, and I would be starting over because of the things that I just started to hear. I am very much the type of person that I want to jump in and get going and make change. But I have found in each of my different positions, when you slow down and you listen first and you really start to get lots of feedback, that's when you can collectively start to make true change. And not just change, but go from good to great. And to really set the path so that all people are on board. And it's not just me doing it, but we are doing it together.
Dr. Carlson, on my visit to Fall River, there were a couple of things that stood out in the conversations that we had with the groups that we met with and the tours to the schools. There were two things. One was the direction of which you've taken teacher and professional development. So I'm interested in having you speak to that, and I'm also interested in specifically my visit to the Tansy School, because we have in our strategic plan a theme of moving towards project-based learning. And in touring various schools, I see project-based learning as a location, and what I saw at Tansy was project-based learning, and that differentiated learning was the culture of the school, and there's a difference in that for me. So I'm interested in if you can speak to how your influence and work in the Fall River community impacted both of those areas, please.
I mean, Fall River is unlike any district I've worked in, but I was really afforded the opportunity to start before I actually started, which was wonderful. So my first official start date was July 1st, but I had got to graduate my seniors at Central, and so I was able to resign my position as a principal before the school year ended, and so I was able to really go into the schools and sit in classes and talk with teachers and have focus groups and go to lunch with my secretary that I didn't know from Adam, but we needed to be best friends by the end of the week. And what I found was not unlike what I felt when I taught, is we had a lot of what you needed to do. You need to move our students, but we didn't have a lot of how to do that. It was kind of each school had their own vision and mission. Each school had their way of doing it, and I'm not necessarily saying that I have one school that used to always say it's the Sylvia way. And there's nothing wrong with that, but what are we collectively doing, especially in a district that had so much transiency? We had kids that literally went to 7 elementary schools in one school year. So if you have a child that's moving around, but the curriculum is different in every single school, how are we really moving our kids to the next level? It can't just be one school versus the other. So really when it came to professional development, I saw a sense of urgency that really needed to happen within the district. And the first thing was really having an aligned curriculum. And that's not easy to do. A lot of systems just go purchase a curriculum, but I was very fortunate to have the Commissioner of Rhode Island move in 2 houses down, and he worked on Engage New York when he was the Assistant Commissioner in New York, and so got to have a lot of personal conversations about the system. Massachusetts came out with a hot list of the best curriculums in the nation and the world, and Engage New York happened to be one of those. Change, it has to happen slowly. It can't just be me coming in as a new assistant superintendent and force feeding something. So what we started with was developing teams of teachers and administrators to review curriculum. And when we started to come up with is that we wanted to blend different lessons, we started to look at what are those instructional strategies that we have been trying that we really feel that we can dive in. And I talked about this at the last time is sometimes I want to do everything at once. And what we really ended up doing was scaling it back to 2. We focused on blended learning, and then we also focused on closed reading. Blended learning, some schools had never tried it before, and then other schools had already partnered up, which Tansy School had partnered up with the Highlander Institute. I had worked extensively with the Highlander Institute when I was in Rhode Island, and now Massachusetts has the Maple Project. So I reached out to Maple. We started to get that into the district, and now we are one of the preferred Maple districts for Massachusetts, and actually they have a big conference tomorrow. And what we did is we started to highlight those schools that were stages ahead and recognize them, but also partner schools with other schools so that they could cross-train each other. As you also learned, Ms. Rabbit, when you came, we also developed something called the Teacher Institute, Teacher Para Institute, where over the course of the summer we had week-long professional development series, and they learned basically the why and the what, and they learned all about the different standards, and then in the afternoon they got to see how to implement those standards through the use of blended learning and closed reading. We also had 2 full district-wide PD days. We had one in November, and then we just finished our second on February 1st, where we had 54 different classes, pre-K, all the way up to grade 12, in our 4 content areas, as well as CTE, the arts, all different types. But all of the instructors were asked to deliver their PD through the lens of blended learning and closed reading. So really, it sounds like a lot, but it was very strategic. I also gave to you guys the triangle, so it's kind of what do we want our tier 1 to look like, and then what are those interventions for tier 2, and the most critical being the tier 3. So really kind of having that vision beforehand, and then kind of setting up each of the pieces as the foundation that we can build upon for each of the different levels.
Thank you.
Our superintendents have always made sure to be known to the students by being present within the schools and at activities. I was wondering if you had a plan for how to be connected to our students.
I mean, the same ways. I am a huge fan of sports through the fact that I have a very, I don't know how to say it. I have a child who is in love with the theater, singing, though we are desperately looking for a voice coach because he thinks he's Justin Bieber, but he's not. But I love him so much that I have gotten very involved in the arts. My son's part of the Trinity Rep and the Yasi Players, which is a pretty big deal in Providence. So that it keeps us busy. He actually just auditioned for a TV show, and he's so excited. But I really feel like it's important to give him every opportunity because he deserves to explore the things that he loves. The reason why I'm saying this is that you would always find me at football games and basketball games, and especially volleyball, because I was a national volleyball player. I love soccer and baseball and swimming. I don't know why, but I love something about the whoop, whoop, where they scream out to keep them on pace. I'm like obsessed with it. I grew up playing tennis and golf. Sports was always big, but I have found myself drawn to the arts, which never interested me. I can't tell you the number of plays and recitals we've gone to now and going to see the orchestra. I am married to a much more worldly person than myself who grew up going to the symphony. I did my international studies in the Czech Republic, so I am actually a huge fan of the opera. But I think that that's how I get involved, is being at events that are not just necessarily happening at the schools. I have to say I've learned a lot from Dr. Malone in Fall River. He is at events with our retirement community. He's at events kicking off a new baseball field through the YMCA. I have found through his tutelage that when you are not just seen in these 4 walls, when you're seen as part of the community, that your success as being a member of the community is much more positive. So I would really see myself doing those things as much as possible and relying on you folks to let me know, like, hey, this is coming up. If you can come on out. I like being part of things. I am not a shy person. I'm a little nervous today, but I am not a shy person. I think I think people would want to know who I am, but I'm also a very curious person. I want to know the community in which I work. I want to be part of that community as much as possible.
Thank you.
Dr. Carlson, what research have you done with our district data? And have you noticed any trends that you would want to further investigate if you were to become superintendent?
There's a lot. When I came the last time, a lot of what I had researched, because to be perfectly honest, on the DESE site, you can go in and you can look at the overarching last 5 years of MCAS data. You can look at trends when it comes to ELL and special education. You can look at trends when it comes to your non-white population. And having just graduated from Boston College, I have a keen eye of looking at different parts of the data. And you seem to have what in areas that I'm new, but I'm asking a lot of questions. Those being the increase of your out-of-district persons wanting to come to school here, and how are you attracting students, maybe from Southbridge or surrounding communities, in order to bring dollars to this community. I have not seen a marketing campaign, and it's kind of an uptick that I have seen a lot of different districts are actually marketing their district and the things that make them so strong or good. They're really looking at alternative ways. One thought that I had about that is, do we have bus stops in different communities where parents can elect to send their kids here, since we are a district that does allow that, so that parents can drop off within their community, but they're transported here in order to, market our school system. So there's a lot of different things that I have seen but I'm not sure if we're actually doing that yet. I know that the ELL numbers have increased a little bit. I watched the school committee minutes where you are looking for an additional or a couple of new ELL teachers because of the increase of the ELL population within the schools. So really I've looked at a lot of things, but without knowing what has been done or what is currently being done. It's hard because when you watch the school committee minutes, you hear a lot of it, but you can't really see how that's being translated into action within the schools. I also looked at your strategic plan that is going to be, I believe, is starting to be rewritten for the next 3 to 5 years. And what has the team done to look at what has been accomplished, and how did we use funds in order to accomplish that, and where are the next steps, where do we want to go from there? So I think that though I have done a lot of research, I have come up with a lot of questions that I need to investigate further, and I think a lot of that needs to be conversations with you folks in regards to what has been done and what are we doing right now in order to move forward.
Thank you.
Dr. Carlson, we think we have excellent candidates. How can you convince us that you are the person for this position?
I think, gosh, that's a hard question. I kind of like me, so I really think that I don't really want to convince you. I want you to want me. I want it to be an excitement factor that you say, you know what, she is exactly what this district needs. I understand that you have had a lot of male, not a lot, you've only had, 5 male superintendents, and they've all been from Dudley-Charlton. That this is a big change to have somebody from away. My husband's from Maine, so everyone's from away. That's a big deal. Also, you've had all male superintendents. Having a female, that's different. Females, especially people like me that are 6'3", and we walk in and people will automatically think different because I am a very assertive person. I have an opinion. I'm okay to state my opinion, but I'm also very collaborative. I like to have lots of conversations. I also like to have fun. I don't feel like this job should be so narrow focused and boring. I think it should be fun because my students have always seen me as that crazy principal, but I'll tell you what, they keep coming back and they keep on calling me and inviting me to weddings and baby showers, and I like that. I love what I do. I love working with kids because I didn't have that when I was growing up. I grew up in a very Southern traditional family where, parents just kind of sent you. If they do anything, spank them. And they still do that. My sister is still in a district where they spank the kids when they are naughty. Corporal punishment is completely acceptable in districts in Texas, and many other states, actually. I didn't know that. But I really feel like I don't want to convince you. I want you to, in your head, when you guys sit back and you deliberate, that you're like, perfect fit. It's a mutually perfect fit. I have to tell you, I came here, gosh, it was almost 2 weeks ago now, and I got to go around the district, and I'll be honest, I didn't want to like it. This was my first time ever applying for a superintendent position, and I was kind of thinking that this would be great practice. To be honest with you, I loved it. I loved everybody I met. I laughed very, very hard with the office staff, talked about music and kind of styles, and it felt very comfortable. It felt so comfortable. And I went home and I told my husband, well, we're gonna have to get some Shepherd Hill t-shirts, and we're gonna have to get some Mason Road shirts, and it felt so good. So all I can tell you is this: you're gonna make the best choice that you need to make for this district. Do I hope it's me? Absolutely, because I'm in love. I have met such neat people that I want to get to know them. I want to be friends with them, but them know that we're gonna have tough conversations along the way, but that's okay. I'm excited to be here more than I thought I would or thought that I wanted to. But I am here now, and I think I got a call. If we call you back, are you going to want to? Yes, I want to be here. If you see that that's what you want for this district, then let's get to work.
Thank you.
Can you give us some experiences that you have had as an administrator and outcomes that came from them, and explain how they would help us see your potential as a successful superintendent?
Can you repeat the question one more time?
Sure. Give us some experiences that you have had as an administrator and outcomes that came from them, and explain how they would help us see your potential as a successful superintendent.
I don't know if this is, I would say look up YouTube and go to Nights Baby. I worked at a high school where kids did not think the first week of school was necessary at all. I do not need to be stiff. I don't need to be strict and mean. I can be just one of the gang, and we put together a music video, and it's embarrassing, and it's silly, and it's all those things that would lure high schoolers on the first day of school. And we started to send out tweets, and no one uses Facebook anymore. I didn't know that, but we did at the time, sent out Facebook announcements and Instagram and Snapchat that we were dropping a video on the first day of school. And I really thought that I was cool at the time until the kids were like, oh no, miss, that was so bad. But we put together a music video, and we had the highest first day attendance that the school had ever seen. And that attendance continued on the second day and on the third day. And I think that the importance of that, and it was a silly music video, is that when the kids came, they started to see that we cared about them, that we were doing these things because we wanted them to be at school, that this was their safe place. We followed it up, and another example is I fought very hard to get the 21st Century Grant, which was predominantly for elementary and middle schools. And a lot of my communication with the state was the fact that the mile radius around Central High School at the time was the most dangerous mile in all of Providence. And we called it the witching hour. Anytime from 3:30 to 5:30, we had more violent crimes that were committed during that time. And my whole justification for having 21st Century Grant was if we could create programs on our campus after school from 3:30 to 6, that we would keep our kids in a safe area and outside of the witching time. We were very successful, probably because I did not stop until I literally remember the secretary saying, if we give you this grant, will you stop calling? And I said, absolutely. And we got the grant. When we started looking at our partners, we partnered with New Urban Arts. Really, I remember them saying at first, the kids can come to us, and I was like, no, you are going to come and offer it all here, because the whole point is we didn't want the kids to leave. The third thing was about partnering with Sodexo. We wanted to feed our kids and to create an atmosphere that they wanted to come but knew that they were going to get fed. And that was really big. So first one being very silly, to be honest with you, but I think sometimes you have to not take yourself so seriously and have a little bit of fun, because your kids really, they know if you care about them. And I think that they, in effect, will want to connect with you, and they'll want to support you more if they know that you really care about them. And the second and the third is really knowing your student population and where you're at and the types of programs that you need in order to support them, not just in a test score, but as a whole person. I knew that if we offered alternate types of programs, not just basketball, but arts and theater, and we had a debate club and all different types of things, that we could really start talking about the whole child. And the last, the food, that's a huge motivating factor for a lot of our students. I do have to say that I've worked in a lot of urban districts and a lot of low-performing districts, and that has been huge. But I've also worked in rural districts where food and knowing that you were going to get a meal so you didn't have to feel like you had to rush home really attracted kids and kept them safe while on our campuses as well.
Thank you.
Thanks.
You already answered my second question, so I have a different one. You mentioned about how important the budget is. How would you form the budget from the beginning to the end? What would be your procedure to form your full budget for the district?
That's a great question. I think that currently right now, our superintendent is a big fan of zero-based budgeting. I really think that I am a larger fan of, and I believe it's called line-based budgeting, where it's looking at what we have within our schools, and instead of adding on to it, what can you give up or what can you not live without in order if you want to add something new. It's how I've ran the budget in each of my schools and currently how I run my department. So we don't just keep adding every single year because we can't really afford to do that. But by looking at our student population and looking at the needs of our schools and our district, what do we need and what can we substitute in place of that? Right now, what I do with my principals is we give them all of their personnel. We look at how many teachers they have, first, second, third, fourth, and then we look at their student population. So for example, if I had a shift in population where I used to have 25 non-ELLs, now I moved to ELLs, then what we do is we work with the different principals to say, well, maybe I can do away with this position and add an ELL position. I think before we even get to that, we have to look across the district at our facilities and operations. Have we looked at our busing schedules? Are we a neighborhood school district or are we a school choice district? How are we busing kids to school? What are the boundaries? Then we have to also look at facilities, what schools are needing, I don't know, water coolers or air conditioning or heating, or do we need a new roof or do we need a new floor? So I think you have to look at what the things are that come off the top first, and then you can get more fun within the schools and the different needs. So I would kind of look at the whole picture first. A lot of conversations with the budget administrator or the CFO. I think it's also then looking at a priority list and then also a wish list. So if we can get through what we have to do, which are the non-negotiables, we can work with the principals on, if you have your same budget, can you live within that? And then look at the priorities, and then the big fun one is the wish list.
Thank you.
You already answered my second question too, so I'm gonna switch to, what is the hardest decision you've ever had to make, and how did you come to make it?
I think the hardest decision I ever had to make, and I'm looking at all women here, so this is really hard, was to go back to get my master's when I had just had my first child. I think that the decision was hard because I lived on the island of Hawaii, and the school that I was doing the program through was on Oahu, which I knew that I was going to be gone for one full weekend every single month, and then part of a week every single month. And I had just had my first child. Why did I make it? I think because my husband believed in me, and he gave me the opportunity to do it. But I've always had that drive that I always felt that I could affect change at a greater scale. I wasn't happy when I was in my classroom and I was fighting for change in my school. And so my principal said, if you don't like it, put yourself in a position to make the change. And I took that very literally. But I think, like all moms, why was that decision so hard? Because I'm looking at my baby boy, and saying, I'm going to leave you with your dad. I'm very, very lucky, I do have to say, because I have a partner who has always believed in me and afforded me the opportunity to chase my dreams. But I also had a child that did not ask for an ambitious mom or a mom that was going to keep on going. And so I think, like a lot of women, that's a tough decision. It's not just a guaranteed, I'm not the man of the house. But I am very lucky because my husband was like, it's cool. I can change his diaper. I can feed him. But I also had that feeling like I'm supposed to do it all. I wanted to have a career, but I wanted to have a career with kids. And I wanted them to never feel like I had felt. I wanted them to have opportunities. So I've always been drawn to school systems where I feel like I could really go from good to great. And but it's a hard decision, and it's a decision I still, there's times where I can either go to this event or I have to be at work. I make those decisions, but I can definitely say I make those decisions now with my whole family. My kids are part of my decisions. Back then, that wasn't his choice, but when I talk to him now, he's like, I'm proud of you, Mom. So it's all worked out.
Thank you.
Do you have any closing remarks for us?
I haven't been this nervous in a long time.
You don't look nervous, so.
Oh my gosh.
Just relax.
You don't see my leg. It's shaking. I really want to impress upon all of you that I am so honored to be here right now. I think that when I talked to Dr. Dargan, who is an administrator in my district, she's the one that actually told me about this, and she's like, it's just like what you're always talking about. I didn't think that that's what I would find. I can't tell you how happy I am to have found that. I would like you to know that I do like to have fun. I am not the type of person that likes to shut my door and go off and do things in isolation. I'm one of those people that I like to seek other people's ideas and find out how you would tackle this, and kind of make more informed collaborative decisions. I feel like I used to work in isolation. I used to be the master and commander of all, and I have found as I've gotten older, it's so much more fun and more effective when you have so many different voices or smart people around the table. I look forward to working with each of you and having that relationship where you feel like you can give me feedback and I can push back, and yet we can have dinner at the end of the evening and laugh about it. I have to say that in each of my roles, my team has been my family. I can tell you that I still go to old administrators' houses on the weekends, and we laugh about when we used to do these things. And I think that's because people know that when I say something, I really mean it. And I value the relationships that I have formed over the years. I have learned so much from my peers. They've taught me a lot. And I know that I'd like to believe, but I know that I've also taught them a lot as well. So I fully know that whatever decision you make, it will be what's best for Dudley-Charlton. Am I hopeful that it's me? Well, yeah, because now I've met some pretty cool people, and I'd like to kind of get to know them even more. But again, I do really appreciate you guys considering me, and thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, too. Again, on behalf of the Dudley-Charlton Regional School District, I would like to thank you for your interest in this position. The committee is still on schedule to deliberate and select the new Dudley-Charlton superintendent on the evening of February 27th, and that's tomorrow evening. Should you have any questions between now and tomorrow, please feel free to contact the interim superintendent's office, as they will direct your question to the appropriate individual. But do watch the website because of the inclement weather coming tomorrow evening, it may be canceled, the meeting, and we will reschedule.
Okay.
So early tomorrow, we should have that.
Okay.
Okay?
Awesome.
Thank you again.
Thank you so much.
Thank
I
you.
appreciate it.
Nice meeting you.